Okay, thanks for joining us. This is the May version of the water supply forecast briefing, and we'll go ahead here and discuss the weather as well as the stream flow that we've already seen during the month of April, the snow situation, how that's starting to play out, the water supply forecasts, and then the weather outlook, at least for the next 2 weeks, and then the seasonal outlook. So we started April with the map I'm showing you now. The image I'm showing you now is basically an upper air pattern, and I broke it out into 4 weeks during the month, primarily to show you just the variability. It was again, April was another progressive uh, weather pattern. We had periods of dry and warm, and we had periods of precipitation, although we did come in below average in most areas. We started out the month a little bit on the wet and cool side, a little bit of troughiness over the west. You can kind of see that in the way the colors sag over the Intermountain region. Then we had a ridge build to the west of us that kind of shows up in week two and brought in milder air. Things tended to dry out about the middle of the month, uh, around week three, and then towards the end of the month, we started to get a little more active again. We had some good warm temperatures before the storms, but then the storms came in, brought some additional precipitation to our area. So that's kind of how the month played out. The next image I have here is just a snowtail site. This is the Copper Mountain snowtail site in the upper Colorado, and it shows the April accumulated precipitation. You can kind of see it follows somewhat the weather pattern. The first 8 to 10 days, we saw some precipitation increase in there. There's a little gap around the 14th, and that's just due to a network outage. But you can see we right after that we showed an increase in precipitation. So there was another storm system that moved through, and then it dried out for oh for the most part 7, 8, 9 days in there. We didn't really see much, and then precipitation again came in towards the end of the month, and that kind of mirrors a little bit those slides I just showed you with the upper air pattern. Next up, we have the Copper Mountain Snowtail. It shows temperatures, and this is the kind of shows the roller coaster ride of the temperatures throughout the month. Again, you see that little data gap in there, but we started out on the cool side early, around the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, bumped up. Temperatures got rolling, kind of got the snow melt started in a lot of places where it hadn't started already. Then we had a cool down, and then we bounced up. This is really not I would say this is not a untypical pattern for the month of April. Periods of above average and periods of below average temperatures. The nearest stream flow gauge to this site is the 10 Mile Creek. We don't actually do a water supply forecast for this site, but we do have it in our model, and we do plot it. And you can see how long as this is the blue is the observed, the green is actually the forecast into the future, and the purple dots are further out into the future, a little less confidence. But the blue is the observed during the month of April. You can see where we had some rises again around the 10th, 11th. We started to bump up the stream flow a little bit with that first warm up, and then things leveled out, and then we kind of had a slow, steady increase as we had the mild, dry and somewhat warm temperatures during the middle of the month, and then things again kind of flattened out as we had another trough come in. One thing that's also interesting on this particular slide, you can see the stream flow early in the month where we started out. We're actually above the 10% exceedance value, somewhere in that 10 to 25% exceedance value, the historical of the historical record. This has happened at several sites. This is kind of an indication of soil moisture. The base flow, again, is a measure of the soil moisture conditions. And this we've seen at several sites. And 10 Mile Creek's a fairly high one, so we didn't really have much effect from March that would push this up. So that's kind of a nice indicator to see when these came in that they were running a little bit higher. And so that's something that I think we saw in the April stream flow as well that I'll show here momentarily. Next up, precipitation for the month, as I mentioned, was not very good. Below average pretty much everywhere. Severely below average again in the San Juan Basin. southwest Utah, just the pattern that we've seen the last couple of months. The lower Colorado River Basin dry, somewhat below average across the Great Basin, and parts of the upper Green Basin, especially the lower valleys, were below average. There were a few isolated areas that had precipitation near or above average. That was really due primarily to convective storms that were in the area, so that was really localized and not very widespread. The seasonal precipitation map on the right looks a lot like the precipitation maps that we've been showing you the last couple months. With the near to above average precipitation really extending from parts of the upper Gunnison up into the Colorado River headwaters above Cameo, especially above Kremling, and then up into the upper Green above Fontenelle. So that's the area that was really frequented by the winter storms. That's where most of the impacts came, and that's where conditions are the best. April temperatures, then this is interesting leading into the slide I'll show you in a moment regarding stream flow. Again, we had periods of above average and periods of below average, but overall the monthly maximum mean temperatures they weren't really significantly far from average. A little bit cooler than average over most of the upper Colorado River drainage, and near and slightly above further south and southwest for the maximum. The minimum temperature departure from average was not very significant. But when you look at the stream flows that resulted during the month of April, you would think that, especially for some of these sites that I've listed here, that it would have been a much warmer month to produce these. And that's typically the case. So I've got a plot on top here that shows for the observations that we have, and granted some of these may have more sites included in calculating this than others, but showing quite a bit above average in the upper Colorado in the white and in the Gunnison. Some of the other areas are definitely near average, and then parts of the Great Basin are quite a bit below average, even though all areas experienced snowmelt during this time. I have the ranking of a handful of sites there. Blue Dillon, for example, 182% of average for April. Granted, some of these volumes are typically small in April, but still in 55 years of record, that came in number one for this April. Blue Mesa inflow was the second highest that we saw in our records in 46 years, or in the 46-year period. So some significant runoff, and that kind of begs the question, okay, well, we did have snowmelt and some periods of above average temperatures, but we also have seen the model advertise the soil moisture effect, and that's been present in our forecast. So, is this potentially partly due to soil moisture? And it gives us a little bit more confidence that perhaps the model has got a handle on that. Speaking about the soil moisture, once again, you're probably getting tired of this map, but maybe you won't see it after this. This again was the map of the soil moisture conditions coming into the winter, and the areas in the from the green to the dark blue are the near to above average areas where we had the soil moisture was near or above average. Still, it is still affecting water supply forecasts. We believe it affected some of the April runoff. Positive effect on the forecast, again, in the same areas we've mentioned, the upper Colorado, Yampa, Gunnison. It's still having an impact in the forecast that we're putting out for the rest of the season. A negative effect in the Great Basin. In the San Juan, it's really kind of dropped off. There were parts of the San Juan, especially of the basins on the north side above Navajo there, that earlier we had forecasts out that were taking advantage, I guess, of the above average soil moisture. But the San Juan's been persistently dry, and the snow just isn't there. So I think that's really becoming more the primary influence for the forecasts in the San Juan at this time. The next slide up will be the snow, and I have the April 3rd snow water equivalent values compared to the May 5th. These get a little bit tough to look at when we start the snow melt. Some of them, the lower elevations are kind of starting to melt out, and some of those that are maybe more exposed are melting out. So they're going to be turning colors quite rapidly throughout the days. I mean, when we're on that melt period, we're losing all the snow. Some of them may just melt out 2 or 3 days or a week prior to when they typically do in the record, and so it may indicate maybe a worse condition than exists. Others, we just never really had the snow, so you need to kind of go in and look at these individually to make a good assessment. But really what it's showing is where the snow has persisted at the near or above average in the upper Green River, above Fontenelle, parts of the upper Yampa, parts of the Colorado River headwaters, and again, a little bit of the Gunnison up above Taylor Park and the East River, that the conditions are still somewhat good for this time of year. Same thing with the Animus, although the middle and lower elevations have melted out quite a bit. We've also lost, we really never got the snow going in other parts of the San Juan Basin. The Great Basin perhaps had some of the biggest changes. It was a very dry month throughout much of the Great Basin, especially south of the Bear River Basin and the eastern Uinta Basin, or the eastern Duchesne River Basin as well. And the conditions there are quite dismal, really, for early May. I've got a few of the snow plots here that I'll run through. These are some of the same sites that we used previously, just to kind of show you the progression. In the Upper Green River, I have the Kendall site and I have the Triple Peak site. And you can see where we have seen some pretty good snow melt at these two sites. And again, keep in mind there's a lot of area that's above these sites that the snow melt's probably just getting started. And these there's still quite a bit up in this area, so we've had good melt, and we've still got quite an adequate snowpack up above Fontenelle Reservoir. Some of the individual basins here I've got plotted again, just groups of snowtail sites. You can see where we've started the melt in all of them. Upper Colorado main stem still near a little bit above average. The Blue Mesa group still close to the average, a little bit above. Then things kind of get a little more dismal as you get south. San Juan Basin is following last season's trace, last season's, I guess, pattern really similarly. And the Dolores River Basin, again, got up to a little bit above average as a group, but it's melted off quite quickly, and that group of snowtail sites is dropping fairly significantly. I want to mention something. You'll see a lot of these snowtail sites melt out, but does that mean the snow is actually all gone in the basin? And it doesn't. I mean, we simply don't have snowtail sites everywhere, and we don't have a lot of snowtail sites at the highest elevations, where, of course, depending on the basin, we can get quite a bit of runoff from. This is an example of our model. You just seen the snowtail group in the Dolores, where it showed most of those down near zero or having melted out. Yet if I look at an image from our model, this is the Dolores River Basin, and I've kind of highlighted the sub-basin above Rico, where we're still seeing some snow that exists in the model. The lower area is that lighter color. That's the area up to about 11,000 feet and below. There's only really about an inch, actually less than an inch of snow for that area, and the coverage is only about 33%, so it probably looks more impressive there than it really is, at least on the way this image is presented. But the areas up above, where it's a little darker blue, the mean value for that area is around 15 inches, I believe it was, of snow water equivalent. And so you can expect to see some of these snowtail sites melt out before it actually melts out in our model. So if you're getting questions as, geez, why is the RFC still forecasting an increase, yet the snowtail sites are showing they melted out? Many times they do melt out. You still have some snow up above where the snowtail sites exist, and that is something that we do model and that drives the forecast as well, from the daily as well as the seasonal from this point forward. To continue with the basin snow groups here, we have the rest of them. The Duchesne River group. This is weighed heavily, probably towards the western end. I think much of those on the eastern side are really quite low. Some have melted out. Bear River drainage is perhaps the best looking one in northern Utah. It benefited from that storm system, from the precipitation, the big jump that we saw in early February. That's melting out kind of on an average melt out pattern. Weaver River drainage, again, it's dropped a little bit below dry conditions, so that's melted out pretty good. And then as we move further south into the Provo, and I don't have the Sevier and the Virgin on here. The Virgin's out of snow. The Sevier River's not looking very well, but the Provo River Basin, as you move south, you can see how the snow never really got up to the median or the average values at all this year. So next up, let's talk about the water supply forecasts. We did see a little bit of drop in the upper green, but it's not that significant. The forecasts are still above 120% of average, 130% of average or greater. So pretty significant runoff is still anticipated in the upper green. And I just want to make the comment that the forecasts from this point are including, it's basically a May through July forecast, and then we have added the April observed volume back in. So we forecast from the current point forward and add that observed data in to these numbers. As you move south, things are still pretty good through the upper Colorado. We're still forecasting 850 also at Blue Mesa Reservoir inflow. Navajo, though, has taken another big hit, a drop. I believe we were around 505 or something at mid-month last month. McPhee Reservoir has also come down. If we stay dry in these areas, if May comes in below average, these numbers are most likely going to end up being too high. Lake Powell dropped a little bit. I think it was 300,000 acre feet. And then you can go over to the west and see where the Virgin River just really very, very sad conditions down there this year, only 33% of average anticipated. Provo and Weber, those also dropped a little bit, still in that 70 to 85% of average range. So we did see some decrease in the Great Basins forecast. Those are probably the most significant, along with the San Juan Basin as the largest drops. The other areas changed a little bit, but the volumes are still looking pretty good for many of those areas. This map is the forecast trend between the March 1st and April 1st. So it's basically the change in the percent of average of the April through July volumes forecast. So if you look at areas that dropped off in the Great Basin and that, you can see some areas in the upper green in the Great Basin were about 10%, 10% of average change between March 1st and April 1st. Again, the values in the upper green are still significant, though. The big effect in the Great Basin due to the dry conditions, and the San Juan Basin dropped anywhere from 5 to 10%. A little bit of increases in some of the Colorado headwaters, a little bit of the Gunnison above Blue Mesa, mainly at Taylor Park and east. Not much change in the Yampa. Some of those increases can be attributed to the very large runoff volumes that we received in April. We ended up, again, receiving more volume than we anticipated during the month of April, and the model's still suggesting there's enough snow up there to boost these forecasts up slightly. I've got a few of the daily plots on here. These are the evolution plots that you've seen in the past. Let me just go over it briefly again for those folks who may be new to this webinar. These are directly out of our model. This is for the Lake Powell, and it shows how the model has forecast the April-July volume throughout the season. These are run daily. If there's gaps in there, there's a variety of reasons I won't go into now, where there might be a gap in the data or in the run. Perhaps we had a system hiccup or something and couldn't run it that day. But the dark blue dot in the middle is the 50% exceedance forecast value. The very top of the vertical line is the 10% exceedance forecast. The 90% is the bottom. And then the break between the light and dark blue are the 30 and 70% exceedance. So you can kind of see the whole forecast distribution here, and also how it tightens up later in the year. Early in the year, it's very wide because you're basing a forecast in early January on climatology throughout the season, as well as what you currently have as far as stream flow conditions and the snow that's actually in the basin. As you get further into the year, you know more. It's already fallen. We're at the point now where we've only got a couple months, 2 or 3 months left out here, that we're just using climatology to come up with our forecast. But the snow is typically, we've received most of the time what we're going to receive, and the forecast range gets a lot narrower. The other thing I'll mention on here, and I forgot to highlight it on the bottom, that vertical orange line at the bottom is the observed to date. So the forecast on any given day is after April is from that day forward, and then we add in the observed from April 1st to that day. So here on April 6th, it's an April 6th through July forecast with the I'm sorry, May 6th through July forecast with an April 1st through May 6th observation added into it. So it's a combination of those. As we get further in, more of the observations will end up dominating what you see on this. So we'll take a look at some of these. You can see pretty much that most of the forecasts are going to be really close to what the model guidance suggests. The model usually performs pretty well at this time of year. We kind of want to have a good reason if we decide to go away from it, higher or lower. So Lake Powell showing the 7.5 million acre feet value. The next one up here is, we'll take a look at the Fontenelle Reservoir. This is showing, again, 156% of average, 1.1 million acre feet. The model has dropped down. You can see where it dropped down a little bit from April 1st due to the drier conditions up there. Again, on April 1st, we're using normal climate conditions up there. And then beyond that, it drops off because we didn't get normal precipitation. We ended up getting below average precipitation. Next up is the Yampa Deer Lodge forecast. It's been fairly consistent between April and May. Not much change, and the model hasn't really suggested much change. Next up, I have the Colorado Cameo forecast. Again, just a slight increase. You can see where the model also bumped up a little bit in this area. And I added a few more of these simply because some folks had requested they'd like to see a couple more of these this time. Plus, there's a few areas that were of interest, and one of them was Taylor Park Reservoir. That one had about pretty good inflow last month, and then we're for April anyway. And then the model is still climbed from early April into early May, and we're still forecasting pretty close to what the model guidance has at this point of 129% of average into Taylor Park. The Blue Mesa has been really consistent for quite some time. The model, granted, it's kind of bounced around a little bit, but it's been, if you draw a straight line, you're going to find it right close along to what the model guidance has been giving us since about mid-March. So that has not changed. That's just been, I haven't had a forecast not change like Blue Mesa for quite some time. So that's 850,000 acre feet. And then with the San Juan at Navajo, you can see where we've just continued to drop down. A couple storms here and there have pushed the model up, but then things would dry out, and we end up with month after month of below average precipitation. So we continue to see the model guidance decrease in the San Juan Basin. And then a couple in the Great Basin. I have the Weber near Oakley. This one again has been fairly consistent, hasn't changed a whole lot. Forecast of 92,000 acre feet. And then that's pretty much it that I plot on. Again, those are all available on our webpage, and you can get in and track them from this point forward. They get kind of interesting as we get some of the observations coming in. If more than welcome again to call us, but definitely if you want to see how the model is evolving throughout the rest of the season, you can find all these on our website each day. So next up, I'll talk about the upcoming weather and kind of a seasonal outlook, and then I'll open this up for any questions you may have. The upcoming weather. So we're into a bit more of a progressive storm pattern developing again, at least for maybe another week or so. The models seem pretty consistent on storm number 1, which is kind of moving into the area right now. There should probably be some convection with this, some thunderstorms as this moves through. And this will kind of move through slowly during the week, probably exiting the area around Friday. And then beyond that, the models do diverge a little bit. One of them brings a pretty good system, which is storm number 2 on this image, that comes through in the Sunday, Monday, possibly Tuesday time frame. The other model kind of keeps the storm, it brings it into the west coast, but kind of keeps it further north. And then later next week, a ridge builds over the area. That would be a pretty significant ridge if it does. But again, the models do diverge at that point, and we're just going to have to watch and see how things evolve. Hopefully they'll come together on a solution right now, but it's definitely worth, I think, watching to see what happens next week if we get that big warm up, because that's definitely will affect peak flows if that is the case. This next image, I apologize, it's a little tough to read, but it's actually what is fed into our model. This is from some local software that we run here. And it shows the precipitation distribution for today through Friday over the area, what's being fed into the model. The values kind of range from about a tenth of an inch upwards to maybe an inch in some of the higher mountains. We've got amounts. The heaviest precip again looks like it to be in the Upper Green River Basin, northern Wasatch, Yampa River Basin, and down into some of the Colorado River headwaters. It kind of drops off after that. Once you get south of the Gunnison, south of central Utah, things are a lot lighter. So anyway, that looks like that's coming in over the next week or the next few days. The next image I have is the precipitation forecast. It's a 7-day precipitation outlook, a little different map, but similar idea. This would include the storm system that would come in on the Sunday, Monday timeframe, as well as the one this week. So the amounts are a little bit higher and the coverage a little more extensive. But again, it shows precipitation in the neighborhood of a half inch or greater over areas, maybe potentially into the upper San Juan, Animas area further north, and especially in the Upper Green and parts of Utah. So that'll be if that other storm develops and comes in as one of the models suggests it might. I have another image here showing the temperatures coming up, and this is important because I know a lot of you are starting to look at the stream flow as far as the peak flow dates, and are we going to start seeing those big rises that you've been watching for on some of these northern streams. At least for the next few days, we should be below average. These areas to the west, in the where we have the blue contours, are showing the departure from average for the maximum temperature. It's just a weekly mean value, but at least into this weekend, it kind of shows temperatures dropping, staying somewhat below average, cooler than normal. Beyond that, as we get into late in the weekend and next week, a lot less confidence here. Temperatures, it shows kind of near average. You can see the big temperature increase to the west of us over California as that ridge wants to build. That it's yet to be seen whether we'll get that kind of a big temperature or a big warm up over the area. Again, due to the weather models that we're looking at being somewhat in disagreement over next week. So that's something we'll have to watch, but this does suggest a ridging to the west that may eventually move into our area. Long-term precipitation outlook from the Climate Prediction Center shows at least we're kind of in an equal chances for most of our area through the month of May. Then there's the May through July and July through September. So the May through July and July through September both start showing increased chances for above average precipitation over the Four Corners area initially, then it expands it over much of our area by late summer and fall. I looked at the prognostic discussion because this really is somewhat similar to an El Nino type of pattern for late summer, but they didn't really suggest they were buying or they were using the El Nino effect in this analysis right now. This was simply from some dynamic models that they run. So for whatever reason, they are increasing the chances of precipitation. That May through July map is really heavily influenced on late in the summer because you can see in May there's really not much indication for above average precipitation over the Four Corners. So that's more of a June, July effect and late summer into fall. So this will be interesting to watch to see how things play out as we move into later in the summer. So in summary, and I'm almost done so you can ask questions, but in summary, the soil moisture effect, again, it is very prevalent in our forecasts, is pushing forecasts higher in much of the upper Colorado River Basin, north of the Gunnison, and it's a negative effect in the Great Basin. We believe we're seeing some of this effect in the April observed stream flow, and that should be effect. Dry conditions and lack of snow are the primary influence, I believe, in the San Juan and Virgin River Basins right now. The snow melting out at the lower elevations, dropping significantly out in the Great Basin, but we still have that near to above average from pretty much the very far northern upper Gunnison up into the areas I mentioned, the upper Colorado, Yampa, and Upper Green. The forecasts, as you've seen, they have not changed significantly. The biggest changes were the drops in the San Juan Severe, Virgin, and Great Basin. And then the weather pattern, it looks to us like it should be active at least in the mid-month, and we'll kind of see what happens beyond that. Um, Increased chances for the above average precipitation in the late summer, according to the CPC. And then El Nino is increasingly likely. I think the last I heard was a 60% chance. And they've also discussed that maybe it'll get going a little bit sooner, by late spring and definitely by summer. So that's something that I actually moved the timetable up, at least in what I was able to read. The rest of our webinars, we have one more scheduled for June 5th. And that will be a water supply webinar. We discussed the peak flows. We've typically had peak flow webinars, but we're also into that period now where things tend to be changing day to day as we get into, the melt. And so we would actually prefer to, unless there's an overwhelming response, to have another webinar. I think it's more beneficial if we speak to you or your group individually, and we will be available to participate in any calls that you might have. Simply because we're getting to that point where we're transitioning from these static graphs that we put out, and we are going to update them one more time tomorrow, into where we'll be looking a lot more at our daily model and the temperature forecasts and precipitation forecasts that are going into that, and how that's going to affect things over the next week. And those will change quite dramatically. So it's really time to start paying attention to the daily forecasts if you're interested in the peaks. And then finally, I'll just put the slide up here as I unmute this. These are the contacts for the river basin. Let me look really quick if anybody typed any questions in. Okay. I will unmute this now and see if there's any questions.
Conference is now in talk mode.
Okay. Any questions anybody has?
I was wondering when you're going to update the peak flow forecast website.
Those should be updated either this afternoon or tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Working on those right now.
Perfect.
Any other questions? I have several of the forecasters in the office with me too, or in the room with me. So it's
I have a question, and that is, have they said what kind of El Nino they're expecting? Is it going to be strong or weak, or is there any indication of that?
That's a good question, and I got the expert right here. Do you want to address that, Paul?
I asked the expert that.
Sure. Right now, the models are showing that it's about going to be like a moderate El Nino. It's kind of going to be in that. I think the average is around the +1 deviation, so that's kind of in the moderate range.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone?
Will you update the Blue Mesa runoff before May 15th?
Well, I think our date on the Blue Mesa is going to be the mid-month, probably Monday the 7th. What is that? 19th, 17th? We're actually going to release the official forecast on the 19th, but you're more than welcome to call me to discuss it at any time. And we will also, that is again available on the website. You can see what the model is actually trending towards. But if you have a need to discuss it sooner, we can do that. But we'll actually release the official forecast on the 19th.
Thank you.
I had one question here also that was typed in about the last week's snow around Red Mountain Pass, Silverton, help out the Animus. I didn't really see a large change in that. It we typically still receive precipitation at this time of year, and the Animus, that whole area was quite below average. So I would say if anything, it kept it from falling further, but I don't think it really didn't give us a big push in the forecast. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, I welcome you to give us a call if you want to talk to us individually, and then we will, again, we'll have an update again next month. We'll have our final webinar, and we will be putting out the mid-month reservoir forecast here on the 19th. So please, again, give us a call. Thanks for joining us. Give us a call if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.